I met her during my solo vacation. We seated next to each other on the ferry, and later reunited at one of the few tourist spots on the island. "Let's get married." Upon our reunion, she said that to me. "My name is Zach, turned 32 this year. I work in the editorial department of a publishing company. I love my job and don't mind working through the night or doing overtime. Unfortunately, the body tells no lies. My body and stamina couldn't keep up with the demands of the job. To make matters worse, the workload suddenly increased as a long-serving editor retired, and the responsibilities were passed down to me, a mid-level employee. One day, I passed out at work. I was told by the doctor it was due to overwork and stress, and I had to be hospitalized for about a week. Work was hectic, but fortunately, my fairly considerate company managed to send a notice aligning with my discharge day. Apparently, my attending doctor also suggested that I needed a break. And so, for the first time since I started working, I got a long 6-month vacation. I was undecided about how to spend this long vacation, but I decided to visit the northernmost and southernmost parts of the country. I first conquered the northernmost part, Barrow, Alaska. Then I headed straight to Key West, Florida. The southernmost part is Catalina Island. There's a ferry service from Miami, but the ferry couldn't sail due to bad weather. I was stuck there for 4 days. Finally, on the morning of the 5th day, the ferry to the island could depart. The sea was still a bit rough. I usually have a strong stomach and don't get motion sickness, but I was a bit nervous and took some motion sickness medicine. As I expected, the ferry swayed quite a bit. Sitting by the window, I pressed my forehead against the window glass and closed my eyes tightly. By doing this, I was trying to avoid seasickness. When there were 20 minutes left to reach the island, I noticed the woman sitting next to me looked unwell. It seems she was suffering from seasickness. Are you okay? Would you like to take some motion sickness medicine?" When I offered her water, she weakly replied, "I'm fine." She didn't look fine at all. Thinking it might make her feel a bit better, I offered my window seat to her. Then she did the same as me, pressing her forehead against the window glass and closing her eyes. It looked like she was feeling uncomfortable, and her collar was wide open, revealing her fair chest. I realized I was staring and awkwardly looked away. I helped her off the ferry. She was still wobbly, looking pretty unstable. She sat down on the ground after getting off the ramp. "The ground is the best," she said, laying down right there. "Are you okay?" I squatted down beside her and asked. She managed to sit up, still shaky. "Thank you so much. It was rough this time, but you saved me. Thank you." She bowed her head politely to thank me. Her long hair slid over her shoulders, emitting a pleasant fragrance of shampoo. "You're on vacation?" she asked, brushing the sand off her back. I nodded, and she responded with something that was neither interested nor uninterested. "I see." I somewhat wanted to stay but forced myself to leave. "Well, I'll go then. You sure you're good?" she responded with a full-faced smile to my inquiry. Regretfully, I parted ways with her at the harbor. I really wanted to talk more with her, but I didn't have the courage. I felt pathetic, thinking that I should be enjoying myself more while on vacation. While contemplating returning to the harbor, I arrived at the reserved bed and breakfast. Catalina Island is a small. You could cycle around the entire island. The next day, I started exploring the island by rental bike. Sadly, the weather was not clear. The sea seemed rough too. It seemed the ferry from Miami was canceled again. Probably because of that, there weren't many tourists on the island. It felt like time was moving slowly. I headed for the southernmost monument of America. Passing through a winding road like a snake, I could see the southernmost monument of America. There were no buildings around, but I could see several other monuments. There were sound of waves, wind, and occasionally, birds. The wind was strong and I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them again, there was someone by the monument, waving at me. I didn't know anyone here. My heart skipped a beat for a moment. "Thank you for yesterday," she was waving, shouting in a voice that won over the wind. It wasn't a mistake. The girl from yesterday was waving at me. I refrained from running and approached her slowly. "How did you know I'd be here?" "Well, what other places are there to see around here?" she said with a smile. I felt a bit embarrassed as she thanked me again, politely, for yesterday. She introduced herself as "I'm Nancy." "Oh, this is for your help yesterday. You haven't had lunch yet, have you?" Nancy said, offering me a package wrapped in newspaper. It felt heavy in my hand. "Not many diners open now, right? I thought you haven't eaten lunch. It's a packed lunch." Opening the newspaper, I found a lunchbox with sandwiches inside. I felt warm inside, thinking she must have made it for me. "Thank you, I was getting a bit hungry." I thanked her and she smiled, handing me a water bottle. Maybe she means to eat here. We sat a little away from the monument and opened the lunchbox. Nancy casually picked up one of the sandwiches. They looked like typical homemade Southern American style sandwich. Nancy, munching on her sandwich before me, looked happy. "Is your family from this island?" When I asked, she replied, "No." She seems to have come relying on a friend living on the island. She said it had been a long time since she visited. That's when I noticed a ring shining on her left ring finger. My mood suddenly dropped. Making a lunchbox and waiting for me, it's easy to misunderstand. But she was flaunting evidence of being a married woman on her finger. It was a proof that she has no interest in me. As my spirits dropped, the weather also started to deteriorate. Nancy was looking seriously at the increasingly rough sea. Maybe she's worried about the return ferry. If the sea gets rough, it will destroy this amazing scenery. I, who wanted to spend time gazing at the beautiful sea, wondered if Nancy felt the same and spoke up. Her response was something I didn't expect. Nancy said, "I hope it gets rougher." She smiled, hoping for a ferry cancellation due to rough seas. But I noticed. Her eyes weren't smiling. It felt like she had some secret. Like she was afraid someone might come to the island by ferry. Maybe she ran away to this island. I stealthily looked at her anxious face. I wanted to say something to cheer her up, but no words came to mind. "Well, I'm going home. It looks like it's going to rain." Staring out at the sea, now rough and turbulent, Nancy stood up and spoke those words. All I could do was nod in agreement, murmuring, "Yes, true." Despite Nancy's wishes, the next day was bright and sunny. The sea was calm. Almost instinctively, I opened my cell phone to check the ferry schedules. It seemed that they were all running from the first trip in the morning. That someone whom she did not want might be coming to this island on the ferry. Thinking about it started to make me anxious, too. To shake off the anxiety, I decided to go for a walk after breakfast. The sun was much more intense compared to yesterday. While wandering aimlessly around the island, I could hear a man and a woman arguing. Without much thought, I headed in the direction of the voices. The scene was in front of a small house. There was a flashy, flamboyant guy raising his voice at someone. Nancy was standing in front of him with a sullen expression. Apparently, this man was Nancy's husband. I realized this must be the unwelcome someone that she was avoiding. Something must have happened, and Nancy had run away from her husband. Facing her loud, furious husband, Nancy remained cold. I couldn't intervene in a marital spat, so I decided to quietly leave the place. "I'm telling you, I've had enough," I can't stand being hit or abused by you anymore." Nancy's voice, which was calm initially, was getting increasingly louder. Hearing her speak about being regularly abused, I stopped in my tracks. If her husband was violent towards Nancy, I felt I had to intervene. "Just shut up and come back home. You are making me chase you all the way out here." Her husband's shouting became louder and louder. I suddenly noticed a flashy woman wearing sunglasses sitting in a car that he apparently drove here in. She was watching the quarreling pair from the car, looking bored. "You came all the way here. What were you thinking? Bringing your affair partner to take your wife back? Planning a romantic getaway on the side?" Nancy pointed at the car as she spoke. "I see." The woman in the car seemed to be the husband's mistress. Things were starting to feel complicated. "That's it. Please, let's get a divorce." At this word, her husband reacted. His face turned bright red, and he tried to drag Nancy by her arm toward the car. "It hurts. Let me go. Are you planning to lock me up again? I'm not a pet. Let go of me. You should just wait for me at home and shut up. Don't think there's any more happiness in this world." I couldn't just stand there and watch. I had to step in between them and knock his hand away. He suddenly gave me a suspicious glare as I interrupted abruptly. "Leave her alone. She doesn't want this," I said to him, shielding Nancy behind me. He clicked his tongue, asking, "Who are you?" I replied that I was her friend. I told him that I had heard their conversation, and it's wrong to forcefully take her home when she is refusing to do so. "What the heck? Aren't you having an affair too? Do you think you are in a position to say anything about my affairs?" Apparently, he misunderstood me as Nancy's lover. He laughs, making fun of Nancy. Moreover, he began to berating Nancy and said, "This is what you get with such a flirty woman. Don't speak so ill of her." I couldn't keep calm anymore, seeing how he insulted her. He reached over my shoulder and grabbed Nancy's hair. Nancy, being pulled forcefully by her hair, almost toppled forward. "It hurts. Let me go." He pushed me aside and tried to take Nancy away. To be clear, I'm not the fighting type. I'm terrible at confrontations. But this is not the time to back down. I got up and took Nancy back just before she was made to get into the car. I quarreled with her husband next to the car. Nancy stepped in between to separate us. "I am divorcing you." This time, it was my turn to be shielded by Nancy. With her arms spread out, she was staring him down while shielding me behind her. "What will you do after divorcing? Marry this guy?" he said with a mocking tone. The next moment, Nancy turned around, smiling warmly at me. And looking into my eyes, she said, "Let's get married." I was taken aback. But the words that came out were, "Yes, gladly." I was astounded by our exchange as if we were in a fast food restaurant. But it seemed my reply was the right answer for Nancy. She hugged me around the neck with a big smile, saying thank you. "Did you hear that? I've fallen for this man. So, I want a divorce. I've never met such a kind person. I can't be with you anymore." Hanging onto my neck, Nancy turned around and yelled back at him. I braced to be hit by him again at that moment. However, that moment never came. Because he, who had been so high-handed, collapsed at Nancy's words. He sat down on the spot, his shoulders shaking. I thought he was shaking with anger, but, to my surprise, he started shedding tears. Utterly astounded, I let out a dumbfounded gasp, staring blankly at her husband who had started to cry out loud. It's rare to see a grown man cry out loud. While her husband was sobbing, Nancy was watching him with a clearly disgusted look. Then, she swiftly pulls off the ring from her ring finger and throws it at the weeping husband. "Think crying will get you forgiveness? You really never grow up." Nancy looks down at her husband with a contemptuous gaze. I heard later it was always this pattern. He'd imprison Nancy in the house, using violence to ensure she met no one. Then when she'd lose her temper, he'd cry and apologize. He could have affairs freely outside. When Nancy brought up divorce, he flew into a rage and became violent. And he finally clings to Nancy, sobbing. No wonder Nancy wanted to escape. Even her husband's current fling, sitting in the car, was taken aback seeing him bawl. I remember when you were kind. This was the end of the road for a selfish man who thought a gentle Nancy would forgive everything. At Nancy's words, her husband's crying becomes even louder. I'll have my attorney contact you about the details. Don't ever come near me again, Nancy declared, leaving her sobbing husband behind. She tightly grips my hand and starts walking. When I look at her profile, she's firmly closing her mouth and staring ahead. Hey, did you really fall for me? I ask Nancy, who is walking and looking straight ahead. Nancy just answers, yes. I remember feeling the temperature of the hand I was holding rise slightly at that moment. So, I didn't ask any more. She probably wasn't lying. I was sure of it. Hey, let me say it too. She stops at my words and looks up at me with upturned eyes. Her eyes were wavering, seeming a bit anxious. It looks like she's afraid of being rejected by me. I've liked you since the first time we met. I think I will never forget Nancy's face turning red up to her ears the next moment. It's been 10 years since then. Nancy's fierceness back then was something else. I shiver just thinking about it. We're visiting this Catalina island, the place where we first met after a long time. Brings back memories. Next to me, Nancy, with my wedding ring shining on her finger, says this and smiles. I honestly tell her that seeing the ring on her ring finger back then had completely bummed me out. Nancy teases me with a really and a playful laugh. What happened to the ring that you threw away? That ring. It was embedded in the ground. The next day, Nancy said she found the ring embedded in the ground and stepped on it. She laughed uproariously, saying it might come out if dug up. Immediately after that event, we hired a lawyer and proceeded with the divorce process. Her ex-husband wouldn't agree to the divorce, so in the end, it came down to mediation. I wanted to marry her right away, but the divorce took about a year to finalize. I officially proposed to her the night the divorce was finalized. And happily, we get married a year later. It felt like a long journey. Now, blessed with 2 kids, we are a happy family of 4. We have our occasional fights, but that's part of the charm. I think I'm the one who usually gives in during our arguments. Hey, Mom, Dad, come here. Over here, over here. Our children call us with loud voices. Our daughter takes after me, and our son is the spitting image of Nancy. Their personalities are also similar, which makes us laugh. We walk towards our waving children, hand in hand. Okay, time for a quiz. The word quiz excites the kids. So, what kind of place is this? My question is met with voices of dissatisfaction from the kids. It's too easy and not interesting, they complain. Then our daughter snorted and answered. Don't play dumb. It's the southernmost part of America, right? I told her with a composed face, no, that's not right. And once again, there are boos from the children. This is where your mom first let your dad taste her homemade lunchbox. My daughter hits my knee in frustration as I speak jokingly. We didn't know that. The children unanimously voice their complaints. Next to them, Nancy, looking a bit guilty, is smiling. What? I sense she has a secret. Then, scratching her head, Nancy said, actually, that lunch was made by my friend. A truth I learned after 10 years. The kids roll over, laughing hysterically. The beautiful memory shatters, leaving me stunned for a moment. So this is what they mean by truth is stranger than fiction. Come to think of it, Nancy was bad at cooking. I didn't notice about that lunchbox until now. I guess I was just head over heels for her.